listening to the Empathetic Leadership Podcast, Episode 1. Today we're talking about what exactly is empathetic leadership. Hey everybody, Ronnie here. With me is my regular co-host Jason. Welcome to the Empathetic Leadership Podcast. Thank you for joining us on our first episode. This podcast is produced by Hinderless Media and is released every Monday for your enjoyment. And show notes are found at hinderlessmedia.com. Come back often, and feel free to add the podcast to your favorite RSS feed or iTunes. You can follow us on Facebook. All links are in the show notes. Now let's get into the show.
Sensational, that's what you are. What are you doing here? Take one more step and you'll...
So Jason, we are finally here doing a podcast that we've been talking 3 months.
It's about time, man.
Like, how long have we had this in the planning stages?
Too long. Months, for sure. And we always keep telling people about it, and I'm like, well, we're going to record eventually, and here we are, finally at the day. Finally found a day where I'm not ruining things and working, or you're not ruining things by working.
Yeah,
so.
and that's the thing about...
We're hard workers, by the way, people.
Hey, whenever you're a leader, it's like sometimes it feels like you have to be there more than, the people that rely on you.
Sure.
And a lot of times it's that whole concept of like first there, last to leave. It's kind of an old time concept, but it's whenever you have that level of responsibility, I think sometimes you do feel like you need to do that.
Right.
At least I know I do.
Yeah, no, I'm the same way. I've learned from a lot of different people, a lot of different leaders in my life that don't ask somebody to do something you wouldn't be able to do yourself. And so for me, working a lot of hours, and I expect, especially working in the industry that we work in, working a lot of hours is a big thing, and you do that a lot. And so I wouldn't expect anybody else to want to work a bunch of hours if I'm just like, no, I'll just do my tight 32 every week, and that's it. That's all I'm going to do.
And the thing is, at the end of the day, you still got to take care of yourself.
Right.
Because you're not taking care of yourself, you're not taking care of your people. But, oh man, we're getting straight into we got to let people know who we are first.
Yeah, so
Jason,
I'll start off.
Who are you?
I'll start off. I am Jason. I'm a guy, obviously, if you can't tell by my voice. But basically, I'm originally from Ohio, and I moved down to Nashville to do music. So I'm one of the many millions of musicians that are down here. And I've learned a lot about leadership just through the different people I've worked with.
Well, how did you get wrangled into leadership from music? Like, how did that happen?
Basically, the thing is, though, being in music, you already are kind of a leader anyways.
Right.
Because you are like running a business in a sense. You're an entrepreneur, and by doing that, you have to lead people. And just being on stage, I was a rock musician, so being on stage, you get used to, not controlling people, but kind of commanding people what to do and everything. And also within the band, if I've been band leader before,
that's the thing. It's like it was like with any field, you almost have to have a leader in any field you do, whether it's music, security, like our day jobs are, even like with the media production that I'm starting to do now. Here with you, like there's so many leadership qualities that pass over into these things.
Yeah, it's important. I mean, if you don't have a leader, then you don't really know what direction you're going in. And like the last band I was in, I wasn't necessarily the full blown leader in the band, but I think we all kind of work together as far as that goes. So that's just already having that background that really helped me kind of get into it. And then with security, I've just kept moving up, and then I'm like, well, I guess I have to command people now. I don't really like the word command, but just at least lead in a sense of like get people to not only work but want to work.
Right. Now, I will say, like, I'll get into my introduction in a second, but I want to hit on that. And I think it's really important, for anybody that's listening to this, we've got a script sitting here in front of us.
Yeah.
It's really more of an outline than a script. But one of the things that I want to do is like be able to stop on things like that and really hit it. Like you say, you don't like the word command, but that's actually really important within leadership is to have a command presence.
Yeah.
And I think even though you don't like the word, I worked with you. You've got a command presence, and that's okay to have that.
Yeah.
So don't be afraid of that term. Like,
I think for me, the reason I say that is because when it comes to commanding, I think of somebody just saying, you're going to do this thing or else. And it's just like, that's not really the way to lead somebody. That's kind of what I meant. But I totally agree with you.
Definitely a stigma behind the word. I can agree with that.
For sure. So what about you, man? Like, what's Why are you such a great like? By the way, I met this guy through he was a supervisor, and he just randomly came out to a location I was at, and I had no idea who this guy was. I watched him lead, and he's done a heck of a job, and I've actually learned a lot from him. So, where do you come from? What the heck? Where does it start from?
Man, I appreciate that. First off, so I'm originally from Mississippi. I just moved to the Nashville area.
Notice the accent.
Yeah, so but we are a Nashville-based podcast. Really, what happened is I eventually got into leadership about 5-6 years ago. Was managing a restaurant, and I really was terrible at it. And I've learned so much from mistakes I've made. That's actually where my leadership, really started. Was more in, went to this thing being a boss to all of my people at the restaurant. And I realized how much it didn't work and how much these people hated me after so much time of being a boss. And that kind of sparked this, like, how do I become a good leader? So I started reading books, stuff by Simon Sinek. Of course, if you're listening to a leadership podcast, you probably know who Simon Sinek is.
Right.
But not only that, but I started developing my own style. Most leaders try to, read 5-Minute Manager or 1-Minute Manager. They try to become these cookie cutter managers. But I took this thing well, who am I within a leadership role? What do I want to be? And so I started developing my own leadership style, which is really what this podcast is about.
Yeah, no, and I think it's important to have your own leadership style and not to try to copy off somebody else, because I don't necessarily work in the same way that you do. I think we're very similar types of people, but there's certain things that I think we do differently, and it's important, that we know that and we don't try to do what each other do, as far as that goes. So when it comes to empathetic leadership, what is empathetic leadership?
So empathetic leadership actually was born out of the idea of servant leadership. Most people, again, a lot of people have read Simon Sinek. They've seen the videos on Facebook. He's went viral multiple times. And he was very much a huge influence for me whenever I first started to develop my leadership style. But I noticed that there were certain things that I didn't agree with him on. He's very much like a corporate leadership style teacher. He teaches a lot about corporate leadership versus practical, on the ground floor, management style leadership. And I started noticing that's kind of the way it goes with most leadership content books. So my style of empathetic leadership is for your managers. It's for people who are on the ground, who are managing people directly. That's, not for, I'm sorry, if you're a CEO, listen to this. We're not the podcast for you. What I'm looking for is those leaders who are on the ground floor, who are leading people. And that's one of the biggest differences between empathetic and servant leadership. Is servant leadership tends to be more corporate based. And I wanted to be more about what do you do when you deal with people directly? And a lot of that comes down to having empathy for them. And over time, I developed 11 points that kind of describe exactly what empathetic leadership is. And so, really, you're going to see a lot of similarities with servant leadership, but it's not exactly the same.
Right.
There's some minute differences.
There's parallels, but there's some differences with it here and there. So
it's kind of an evolution, I think you could say,
okay,
of servant leadership. Servant leadership's not as young as most people think it is. Servant leadership's been around since the 70s, the concept of it. And just like anything else, over time you have to adapt and
things change.
And change. And servant leadership has adapted. Simon Sinek is a perfect example of that. He's kind of your modern, how would you be a servant leader for millennials,
right?
Kind of person. But I've evolved it even further into a more individual based.
Yeah.
style.
Would you say that it's almost like the blue collar version of the corporate version of servant, basically leadership? Yeah. It's just more of it's on the ground, boots on the ground type of thing, where it's person to person instead of just company to people, or CEO or high up manager to a corporate. Because obviously, if anybody's worked in corporate ever, which I have before, actually, it's a whole different ball game than it is in a different, right, other style of business. Whether it's mom and pop type stuff, or it's just name another industry that's not super corporatized, and then it's a completely different ball game. So
right, it's very much like. This leadership style is very much for your supervisors. Even if you're you've just got 2 or 3 people that you're leading. It's for your general managers of a restaurant that have between 20 and 40 people. It's for, those people that are dealing directly with their workers on a day-to-day basis. And that doesn't mean that there's not things you can take away from if you are somebody that's on a multi-unit level. And that's actually one of the challenges I'm dealing with right now, is like looking at the fact that one of my next steps is going to be to get into multi-unit leadership. It's like, how do I adapt some of these principles? And who knows, over the next several months, you guys out there in podcast land may be on that adventure with me.
Right.
As I continue to develop and hone my leadership skills. So,
yeah, and I think that's going to be a cool thing with this podcast. It's like, not only hopefully we can impart some knowledge that we know from ourselves and from the people we're going to talk to. We're going to have plenty of interviews, all kinds of, cool content I think that a lot of people will be interested in, but we're also going to learn some stuff as well. And that's kind of the whole point of this, I feel like, is not only we don't feel like we're the smartest people in the room or anything like that. It's we want to learn, and and when it comes to leadership, yeah, it's applicable in any industry. I mean, just name it. And if you're really good at leading people, managing people, and working with people, and learning how to effectively communicate and with empathy and everything, it's going to make it a lot easier just to not only get a job, but to be effective in your job, I feel like. So, I'm excited to kind of go on this venture with you, because I also want to learn, not only from you, but just from the people we're going to talk to.
Right. And I really want to hit on that for a second. You talk about like learning, and like that's the number one thing I see so many leaders that end up failing or end up getting stuck in a position, and then they become incompetent. And yes, that's a strong word to use, but look, I am a lot more. I'm way harder on a leader that's incompetent than I am on a worker or a follower that's incompetent, because of the fact that there are ways to coach a worker that is incompetent out of that incompetency, but most of the time when a leader's incompetent, it's because of the fact that they've stopped learning and they've stopped listening to other people.
Would you say they're more set in their ways as well when it comes to that?
Okay. And that's what I really want to hit on. It's like, it's important as a leader to always be open-minded, to always be willing to learn. I've been in Nashville for 4 months at the time of this recording, and I've learned so much since being here, dealing with other leaders that I hadn't dealt with before. And I believe that is one of the core foundations of being a good leader, is being willing to always learn and realize that there are ways to do anything better than the way you're doing it at the moment. Yeah,
I totally agree. I think to be a good leader, you also have to be wise, and to be wise, you have to always be learning. That's the way I always look at it, and that's how I was always taught by people. And there's people that I find really important that are almost like mentors to me, that I think that are always learning something new, and that's their goal in life, is just to continuously keep learning, because they feel by the end of their life they'll have just so much knowledge, and that's a great goal to have. I think it's a great goal for anybody to have out there, because it'll make you not only a better person, but you're going to realize how little we actually all know. We don't know as much as we all think we do. So, but yeah.
So I want to go ahead and hit these 11 principles of what.
We're not going to hit them all today, by the way. We're going to throughout the podcast.
I want to just
so you all know,
just introduce you to what the 11 principles of empathetic leadership are. The first one is kind of obvious whenever you hear empathetic leadership podcast. People focused.
Yeah, makes sense.
At the end of the day, you got people, and you got to take care of them.
Right. Focus on the people.
Next up is highly organized.
Something I'm probably not great at, because I'm not super organized as a person.
Look, I'm going to tell you straight up. I actually was in an interview a couple of months ago. Which if any of my security people listen to this podcast, like any of my bosses, I'm always looking for something better. So give me more money. I'm
Who isn't, right?
I'm just kidding. But I was in an interview, and the guy asked me how I'd rank myself on a scale from 1 to 10 on organization. I was like, I give myself about an 8.5. And it wasn't good enough for him. And I get that. Don't get me wrong. But I also think that anybody who answers 9 or 9.5 or 10 to that question is more than likely lying. Mm-hmm. I've met some extremely organized people who will still say that I'm an 8 on organization. Because you can always be more organized.
For sure.
So it's one of those things, just figuring out, how do I organize my time better? How do I organize my workspace better? How do I organize, my people better?
Right.
And that's just as important to taking care of people as being empathetic towards them.
Right.
So actually it is a form of empathy because you are showing that you have respect for their time by making your time as dense as possible.
That makes sense.
So next up is mission-minded. So how does that tie into empathy, right?
So, I don't know. I was going to try to come up with a quip, but I got nothing. I got nothing.
Well, it's at the end of the day, we're doing a job for a specific reason. And a lot of times the companies that we work for, they have missions, they have specific missions in mind. And here's the thing: if you're not doing your mission, let's go to security. For those that don't know, security, it's a contract style business where these bigger security companies have contracts with different clients that bring the security.
Correct.
Well, if we don't accomplish that mission of keeping these areas secure, then we lose those contracts.
Right.
And if we don't fulfill that mission, lose that contract, then our people are out of jobs. We're not taking care of our people if we don't focus on the mission.
It's true.
Next up is learning oriented. We kind of hit on that earlier. You've got to always be learning.
Yeah.
And
I think sometimes everyone's guilty of that, where you stagnate a little bit and you're like, I know a lot and I've done well.
Right.
For myself, especially if you move up, if you ever become like a CEO, or if you just become like your company becomes super successful, obviously your time becomes a lot smaller because you have more responsibilities, blah, 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 all that stuff. So that makes it tougher to always be learning on it. But I think it's an important thing to always remind yourself that, like, I'll always spend some time, whether it's reading, whether it's talking to somebody, whatever, learning about, just anything, and how to be more effective, because we can always be more effective.
Right. And there's plenty of ways to do that even within a busy schedule. Listening to podcasts on your drive home. Get audiobooks, Audible. Like, I love Audible because I'm like getting David Goggins books over here and like Simon Sinek.
Right.
It's like, listen to Audible. You may feel like you don't have the time, but find those 15 and 20 minute times during your day that you're not doing anything else, and multitask during that time.
Right. And I think that's more important now because our time, it's so hard nowadays because there's so many things grabbing at our time nowadays. And that's why, like, doing the music stuff, it's really hard for musicians to grab hold of people anymore, especially if you're in rock or anything like that, because rock is like a blue collar type of music that people went out to see, but people don't go out to see music as much anymore. So it just makes it a lot tougher. And so, you lose, you don't have as much time, basically, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And because
you really have to focus on finding those times.
Yeah, exactly.
To get your learning in. You have to be very intentional about learning.
Right. You have to really want it, in order to effectively learn.
So the next one is operationally competent. That's basically just like, know your job.
Now I was going to say, know what the heck you're doing, man.
Like, you can't take care of your people if you don't know what they're doing, and you don't know how to do what they're doing.
Well, and you also don't know how to tell them, like, hey, this is what we need to be doing, if you don't know what you actually need to be doing. So.
Within our industry, like, I actually have struggled with that a little bit where I'm at now, because of the fact that I've got people there that have been there way, way longer than I have. Mm-hmm. And, one of the jobs at where I work is very, very complicated.
Yeah.
And there's times where I got people calling me, and it's really frustrating because I can't take care of the people. But I do, one of the ways to get around that, and we'll go more in detail with it when we get to the episode when we talk more about this, is, don't be afraid to go, I don't know the answer, and then go find the answer.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, we don't want to tell our people to do something and end up being wrong. So.
Right. Yeah. You don't want, because then they'll feel like you're lying to them, and then that's no good either. Then they lose trust. So.
Right. The next one is emotionally intelligent, this one speaks for itself. Like, you got to know your emotions.
Yeah.
If you don't, then you're going to fly off the handle. You're going to get frustrated. You're going to get stressed out. You're not going to be taking care of your people.
Would emotionally intelligent also be part of the whole empathy thing, of feeling other people's emotions as well? Like, seeing it, like, this guy seems like he's mad today, or something is going on. What's going on, man?
Exactly.
Okay.
And that also, I kind of try to include as many examples as possible. You'll see that over time as you listen to the podcast. One of the things, there's one guy that we have, particularly at our workplace, that there's times where I just stop him before he goes to do his job, and I'm like, hey, man, what's going on today? like if you don't have your emotional intelligence, you don't know those moments to stop them and go, hey, what's going on?
Yeah.
You know? So you've got to have some emotional intelligence, not just within yourself, but also.
And I think genuinely caring about people. I know sometimes when it comes, and a lot of people that have ever done security, they get it. The job is pretty basic a lot of the times, but you're dealing with people constantly. So knowing not only your employees and how they work, but also like how they work with other people and how they're doing that day, it's so important, and it's part of the job. It is a customer service based job. It's really what it is.
So the next one is perpetually prepared. That's basically just always having a plan. That's for training your people. That's for making sure the mission gets accomplished. There's so many different things that you just need to keep in mind to be prepared on.
Yeah. Well, it's good to be prepared, because then if, like we talked about how things get complicated at the job, if curveballs pop up, like how do you know how to handle the curveballs if you don't know really how the whole thing works? I mean, even if you don't have the answer, like you said, you can at least get towards the answer because you know who to talk to or where to go for it and be prepared for it. So
right. Next thing is open-minded. We kind of hit on that under some of the other points. And you'll notice as we go through this, like a lot of these points tie into each other.
For sure.
And that's very intentional. If you're ever, developing a thought process, like there's, if things don't start tying together, then it's really not very cohesive and it's not held together very well. So you should be seeing crossover here. But open-minded, that's just, always keeping your mind open to what's going on in other people's lives. Open-minded to what, your customers or your clients' needs are. And all those things go back into taking care of your people.
Yep.
So, and an example of that is, being able to, well, let me put it this way. I have a house theory. And I'm going to go over this very briefly because when we get to that episode, I'm going to go in detail with it.
Okay.
My house theory is that we only see people through the windows of the house of their life.
Okay.
And
that's what I always called Facebook, by the way. I always use Facebook as like, that's the window,
Right. And so, like if I spend right now, I'm spending this 30 to 35 minutes here looking at Jason. But
beautiful face.
When Jason goes home, I don't know what goes on there.
It's true.
And you don't know that with your employees either. So when you have an employee that comes in and they're having a bad day and their productivity's down, like remaining open-minded to go, what's going on in the rest of their house? Because I'm just seeing this one window into their life.
Yeah. No, and like you said, it all ties back into understanding or trying to understand how somebody else is feeling. It's one of the hardest things I think that we have in this world right now is that people are lacking empathy, and that's why you have all the online bullying and all the different issues that are out there, is that people lack the whole ability of like, we have no idea what this person's dealing with. Especially like even that, let's say that weird kid at school. We always had, everyone had that weird kid at school.
I was that weird kid at school, but
I was the goofy kid. I was the kid that always got in trouble because he wouldn't stop talking. Hello, podcast. What's up? But anyway, there's usually a reason why they are the way they are, or maybe like, they maybe not dress well. Well, maybe their parents don't have any money. Maybe they have, maybe they struggle with things that you couldn't even fathom.
Right.
I was listening to I've listened to a lot of podcasts as well, and sometimes you learn from guests, especially from famous people, like, oh wow, you grew up in a way crappier life than I ever thought you did, and you actually had a lot harder, and it explains why you are the way you are.
Right. Read David Goggins' book.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
Yeah. Well, David Goggins, and then throw out this is like a promotion for another podcast, but like Joe Rogan had Mike Tyson on the other day, and learn because for a while there was times where I couldn't stand Mike Tyson just because the way he treats women and all that other stuff. But then you go back and you really he broke down his whole life, and I was like, oh,
right.
He was getting drugged up at 10, And
if you're interested in either David Goggins' book or that podcast with Joe Rogan, we'll have the links to both of those in the show notes.
For sure.
So the next thing is logically centered. Now, as much as it's important to be emotionally intelligent, you have to still make your decisions based on logic.
Makes sense.
You can't, go off on an emotional tangent to make your decisions, because at the end of the day, that kind of goes back into, the getting upset and, blowing up towards your people. That's an emotional based decision.
Right.
Now, if somebody does something wrong and you make the decision of we've got to go through this process to coach this person back to, a healthy work position, that's a logical based position.
Makes sense.
So it doesn't just tie into the people, but also into your mission and how you accomplish it and how you deal with your clients. At the end of the day, everything has to come from logic whenever you work from a leadership position.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people, I don't know about you, but I sometimes struggle with that, especially if you're yourself having a bad day and then something else goes on and you're just like, I have to be logical about this, but I want to blow up. But especially with our job, I'm not going to go into specifics, but there's things that get frustrating with it a lot. And it's things that we can't control. And one of my favorite things that Ronnie ever told me was always focus on the things that you can control. And it's something that has really helped me along the lines, and I'm sure we'll explain a lot of that kind of stuff as we go throughout the podcast. But being able to think that way, it really makes you less frustrated because you don't feel like you're so trapped because you're like, you know what? I can't control whatever is this thing that I don't like, so I'm going to move on to this, or I'm going to do whatever I can that I can control and to make it better,
And that's a very logical-based position to come from.
Exactly.
So the next one, and this is going to sound contradictory, but humbly confident. You've got to have confidence but be humble at the same time. Mm-hmm. Because if you're not confident within the decisions you make, within the job that you're doing, your people are going to feel that. But if you're not humble about it at the same time, you're going to go from being a leader to a boss. And that's not the position you want to be in either.
No, that's kind of what I was saying from the beginning of the show is that the difference, and for me, as far as like just commanding and telling people what to do and actually like leading the people to to the goal, I'm not probably explaining it super well, but basically instead of just, I've had bosses that just yell at me, tell me what to do, and don't even care how I feel.
If you're a leader listening to this right now, like, don't be that guy.
Yeah,
don't be that gal.
Don't be, guy or gal. Don't be, and I've had both, and I've had a lot of different. I've worked in retail for a while. That's where I got a lot of that. Because it's all about it's a numbers game, and same thing with any type of corporate thing as well. I had that as well, where if you don't hit certain numbers, you just get yelled at, and that's something that Simon Sinek actually dives into a lot as far as why a lot of corporations have issues nowadays, and some of these new agey corporations don't, because they understand that it's the long game. It's not the short game. It's not about these arbitrary numbers that are being thrown in there. It's about having employees that want to work for you and they stick with you over time. That's how you build loyalty, I think. Because a lot of people complain about millennials not having loyalty. Yeah. So I disagree. It just depends.
The thing with the millennials, and I'm going to follow this tangent for a second. Our time's kind of getting away with us here.
Go for it.
If you guys will just give us, I promise you we're not going to go long on every episode.
Yeah.
But I do want to go off on this tangent real quick. The thing is with millennials is the millennials aren't going to just be loyal to you because you wear a different color shirt or you have a position or you wear a certain badge, or military people just because you've got rank on your chest. They're not going to. You have to earn that loyalty from them. And I'm going to tell you something right now, is if you are not okay with that, then you need to get over it.
Right.
Because this is a different world. You have to earn their loyalty. They're not going to just believe you're good, because you know why they're that way? Because they're just like you, Jason, where they've been in retail or they've been in these jobs where they've had bad leaders that had rank or had a different shirt or had these positions that were leadership positions, but that person wasn't a real leader.
Right.
And so nowadays you have to earn it. You have to. And it's not going to change. You're not going to change people. And quite frankly, you're going to become a leader in your work, or you're going to become a hero in your workplace by becoming a real leader and earning that loyalty. Because you may be that person that's in retail management that may be the only person they can really rely on, that's being empathetic to what they've got going on, that is being understanding to them. And you will become a hero. You do not know, like, I've got troubled people working under me right now.
Yep.
I've got people that have grew up in the hood, that have been involved with some gangster stuff. And I'm going to tell you something. Like, we're in the talks to getting one of the guys to do an interview with us right now that's been going through some of the,
he's had a crazy
type
life.
stuff.
Yeah, he's gone through a crazy
and
life.
Quite frankly, it's so different to him to have somebody that's in an authority, and I'm doing air quotes, I know you can't see me, that's in an authority above him. It's like crazy to him that there's somebody that actually cares.
And believes in him.
You know,
that was something I noticed that I don't think he's ever had anybody believe in him.
Right, and that's the thing.
It's crazy.
That's one reason why I wanted to do this in the first place, is I want to be able to equip people to be that hero. Because I'm going to tell you, like, nothing feels better than that. No amount of power or power trip feels as good as knowing that you're making a positive impact on somebody's life. And I'm going to tell you, if you lead the right way, you're going to make a difference in people's lives. You're going to change people's lives. So,
heck yeah, man.
Tangent over. So
that's a good tangent.
The last point, point of what the 11 principles of empathetic leadership is being feedback friendly. Always, like being willing to listen to people when they give you feedback on, even if it's the people who are following you, your subordinates, if they come to you and say, I don't like the way you said this to me.
Constructive criticism.
Being willing to take that.
Yeah.
If you ever shut down feedback, then
what are you doing?
Yeah, like at that point you can improve.
Right.
So,
and even if you don't agree with the feedback, at least make the people feel heard. And I think that's a really important thing. Is anytime I've tried to talk to somebody and I don't feel heard, I'm just like, you just automatically don't like the person. You're just like, I don't know. They just seem arrogant to me because they don't even want to listen to what I have to say, whether they agree with it or not. So
yeah, and it makes your people have more faith in you if they know they're being listened to, if they bring criticisms to you and feedback.
For sure.
At the core, man. Like, if you want to know what empathetic leadership is in one sentence, basically it's realizing that your subordinates are people that rely on you to be their advocate.
That's a good way of putting it. I like that.
Yeah. So here's the thing. Our time's really getting away from us.
We're talkers, man.
I could sit here for like 2 hours and we could be like the Joe Rogan podcast, just go 6 hours.
3 hours.
But here's the thing. We've got 11 episodes planned out over the next 11 weeks for you guys that's going to hit in detail every single one of these principles. And then
we got interviews as well with all kinds of different leaders. I'm super pumped about it.
And from there, we're just going to keep, going into different leadership principles. And one of the things we really want to focus on is just getting people's stories out there.
Yes.
And so this episode was a little bit more about just kind of introducing you to what empathetic leadership is.
And who the heck we are.
And who we are.
Yeah.
But just get ready for like more stories. Because that's where you learn, is from stories about the past, stories about other people, and really just developing from those stories. So,
yeah. I'm excited, man.
I am too.
It's going to be an adventure.
Well, it's always an adventure with you, Jason.
It's true. These are facts.
Well, guys, that's it. That is it for today for the Empathetic Leadership Podcast. Thank you, Jason, as always, for your insight.
Hey, anytime. I had a lot of fun, as always, and I can't wait to go on this adventure with you, like I always said.
And thank you to each of you out in podcast land for having joined us today. We hope you learned something today that you could use to make life a little bit easier for you, your employees, and your senior leaders. If you have any suggestions to make this podcast better, feel free to email us at media@hinderlessmedia.com. That is media@hinderlessmedia.com. And don't forget to review us on your favorite podcast provider. Have a good week, and we'll see you next Monday.
See you guys.
Sensational.